Hello and welcome back to Conversations Christians Suck At. My name is Amy Register. This is Ask a Christian. It's a place for authentic discussions surrounding the Bible, Bible studies, and following after Jesus. So if you're into that, you'll probably like it here. And all the stuff we do, from community Q&A to topics like this and different Bible study discussions, you are welcome. We'd love to have you subscribe and like this video if it's your cup of tea. Now, I want to say a couple of things before I introduce our guest today. Number one is that if you yourself are dealing with having to make the decision about having an abortion, this is a safe space. I am a safe person, or at least I try to be. I want to be there to walk alongside you and not to boss you around or tell you what to do. I want to hear you out. And if you ask my opinion, I will help guide you. And if not, I'll just listen and love you. The other thing I want to say is, because of the nature of this discussion today, there might be some triggers, and I want to encourage you to figure out if you can watch this with love in your heart. That's what this whole thing is about. Can we discuss abortion with love? And can we assume that people who are making the decisions about whether or not to have an abortion are doing so out of love? Today, I have a special guest for you. You've seen him before. His name's Ryan Becker, host of Absurdity podcast and several other things of that nature. Welcome back, Ryan.
Thank you. It's good to be back. I'm excited I am moderately excited to jump into this topic.
As much as we can be excited about the topic of abortion. So
yeah, I'm excited to dig in. I'm just not excited about the topic itself.
Here's my blanket statement. This is why we're doing this series. Christians suck at talking about abortion. And Ryan, I don't know if you saw my Facebook feed. I tagged you in when I asked the question. Did you look at it?
Yep, absolutely.
Basically, what I wanted to say is, hey, community, what has your church done to talk about it and model it in a loving way? And instead of getting any actual feedback, like, here's what my church teaches, and yes, we've talked about it regularly, I just had people putting like, yep, abortion is murder, and especially murder of, these kinds of skin colors. And people went straight into their opinions and what they believed. And when I pressed them to say, and how has your church presented this? How has your church talked about it? It was the crickets. Is that your experience as well, Ryan? Or do you have a different?
Yeah, I would say that the church, very rarely do I see people talking about it in a non-dogmatic way. So it's very much a from the front, I'm talking about this. You'll see it on Facebook. You'll see it. I do think Christians are talking about this, but I think in church I have not seen, in my experience, a lot of constructive conversations around this. And I say conversations and discussions, not I'm telling you how this is. And what that results in is, every time that I've done a Q&A anywhere that I've spoken, I get that question almost immediately. Every single time, because people are asking it, but no one really wants to dive in unless they feel that's so black and white and their position is, the more confident they are, sure, but no one's willing to enter it with any sort of nuance or acknowledge that there might be some gray area here.
Yeah. And that's the first part of this, is just acknowledging that we're doing poorly because we're not approaching this with nuance. We act like people who are pro-choice. This is generally, like, I know people are going to say, not me, but generally it seems like what I see is that we are approaching people who say they're pro-choice as if they are pro-abortion. Like, they really, like, we love abortion. Like, that's the kind of people. And I've truly never met somebody on a personal level who has not struggled and cried and prayed through and looked for options when they were considering this. So it's like we forget that, we've had people in our own midst struggling with this.
I completely agree. I think if we started from the place of accepting that very few, if any, actually want or are like okay with abortion, like no one wants to go through with it. It is for a lot of people, it's either a last resort. And some people may use it as a first resort, but for the most part, I would say you're safe to assume that the person you're talking to doesn't like abortion either, regardless of their position on it.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for leaving room for the, this. I've heard of people who do use it, who have had 8 or 9, and it's a friend of a friend. I totally believe them. But like, this is so rare, and that person has such huge problems that, like, for us to worry about how many abortions they're having is probably like the least Christian part of that conversation. It's like, you're worried about her 9 abortions. And like anything else that we struggle with as Christians, like looking at the homeless problem or the drug problem, or if we want to call it an abortion problem, we'd all like to see the number at 0, really, ideally. We're talking about things that happened years, probably, before that kind of situation. I mean, you're not going to talk to somebody who's had several number of abortions as birth control and find that they're mentally whole, stable, and healthy. So,
yeah, I think if you're looking at someone who's had 8 or even 1 abortion, and you're looking at the abortion as the main problem, there are so many other things that put them in a position where that was the way out that they found. Like, so even if it was their first resort, even if there are someone who just sees it as a day out, which I don't think is, I maybe there are 5 people total, but like, even so, there's something going on in their heart, and there's something going on in their life that happened way prior that needs attention and needs love and care. And for us to focus in on just the one moment that we happen to feel vehemently or strongly about is, I think, disingenuous, and I think unloving. Yeah,
absolutely. All right. Another thing that I've noticed that we could do a great deal better at is the way that we're name calling. I've seen political candidates especially get into the arena calling people who are pro-choice names like baby killer or other things like that. And like, oh, it's so cringy because we've already decided that what they're doing is killing or murder. And we've used that to just kind of paint somebody into a corner and differentiate ourselves. And I don't like seeing Christian candidates especially doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think I would say 2 things to that. Number one, I think the name calling is a way of dehumanizing and a way of riling up the anger and dissatisfaction that actually drives people to vote. It's actually a fact that the party in power has a hard time keeping power in midterm elections because people don't vote when they're satisfied. They vote when they're angry and dissatisfied. So the name calling is a way to stir that up, but it's also a way to dehumanize so that it's easier for me to act and behave the way that I do, or to believe the things I believe about them. Because if I name call them, I am treating them as if they are of a lesser value than I am, or that or because of their position on the matter. And I think that is, I think that's tragic. I think it's a way that makes us jaded and cynical to these conversations. And the last piece of that is, I would say that we really have a strong need to divorce abortion from politics in regards to the conversation itself. If we keep letting politics take all of the topics, and then we say, well, we can't talk about that. You're being political if you talk about this. No. This was always an important thing. I will say it became more important as a topic politically in the 70s, but in general, this is a topic that matters, that is important. And just because we talk about it in the political sphere does not mean that we can't talk about it in the church sphere. Politics does not get to gain all of the ground and own all of the conversation rights. If that happens, we are neutering the church and the church's ability to be an effective witness for Christ.
Wow. Yeah. That brings up kind of the second point I wanted to talk about today. I've noticed a lot of really one-sided arguments from Christianity when it comes to talking about abortion. And so I want to explore those. And if you're listening to this now and you've heard these arguments, please don't write me off as somebody who disagrees with you. I actually, for myself, agree pretty strongly with traditional Christianity. But for my nation, for, this land of freedom that we live in, I want to give ear to what other people are saying. So, Ryan, you can add some of the other things, but here are some arguments that we've presented as really one-sided. Before I tell you these, I think this is the foundational principle of being able to talk about this well, is that we would have a mutual understanding that God is love, that first and foremost, he is love. If we can agree there, then we've taken away the fear of judgment. We've taken away the worry that we're going to be held accountable for too many things outside of our control, and we can look a little bit more clearly at this. So the thing that I've heard from religious folks a whole lot is the argument about personhood, and that life begins at conception, and that the fetus is a person and not a property. Now, again, like I said at the beginning, we're not going to go into huge detail about this because there are scholars, both Christian and from Judaism, that have looked at this in far more depth than we could in any few hours even.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say that life does begin at conception. Let's say that a fetus is a person and not a woman's property. Then back to that love idea. If this is a life, then do we just value it at its newborn phase? Or are we looking with eyes down the span of this beautiful life? And are we considering our responsibility to take care of that kid, that young adult, that juvenile through those 18 years? Can we set ourselves perhaps on the other side and think, is there any way that this mom has considered her ability to take care of this person and is making the best decision she can out of love? Take your religion, take your politics out of it. If we serve a God of love, when God looks at that woman, or as we say now, person who can produce a child, when God looks at that person and he sees that they have made the best decision they had with the information they had, do you think that he will judge them in love? I think it's very possible that people could be making the best decision in their heart with the information they have. Now, we're going to talk in a minute about how I think the church can influence and change that. But I hate to hear people say, like, this is a person. And we're like, yeah, it's a person, not just now in utero, not just after birth when it's cute and pink and wrinkly. This is a person for the entirety of its life. And are you going to be there to pick it up when this kid has to go to the foster system?
I think there's some real problematic ground with the rhetoric that we've given to this. Even if we agree that the church's position on it is 100% correct, which I do have some problematic theological reasons or theological issues with it. But in general, I tend to agree that the life of a fetus is really important. The potential life of a fetus is really important. But even if we agree there, there's also a woman whose life is at stake, who has to bear this child. And I do firmly believe that there is no one more qualified in, with what we have accessible to make the decisions on that than the woman carrying the baby and her doctor. That tends to be my position there. That being said, we need to do a lot better in resources and care for children and for mothers. And the problem is circling back, the rhetoric that we give has resulted in, if we look at the fruit it's bore, what happens is a Christian woman makes a mistake, or something happens to her, and now she's pregnant. She's not going to go to the people who have hateful rhetoric about people who are even considering abortions. They're not going to go to the people who are holding picket signs and say, help me, because that's not what they're there to do. And that's my problem, is that we haven't tackled this with enough grace to care for the person who has to carry this, if she chooses to carry this baby to term, this fetus to term, right? And that's a major issue, because any theology we have has to be judged as well by the fruits that it bears, and that isn't good fruit.
Yeah, that's right. I think like, and what you're mentioning, having some theological questions, there's like, guys, you do know that abortion's not anywhere in the Bible, right? We've got this one little verse in Exodus, I believe, about, that there's a fine if striking a woman sends her into early labor, she loses the baby. We find people, and then if the woman's life is lost, it's life for life. Now we've got rabbis who have been interpreting this for centuries upon centuries, who say that in this case, it appears like the fetus is a property, the most precious property that you could ever imagine. Yes. But at a certain point, and like another thing is, I don't think people realize that especially our tradition, what our tradition has come from is these interpretations. I don't think people realize that the Jewish and Muslim interpretations had a big jump on what Christianity was doing with those verses.
On top of this being, I mean, after the civil rights were passed, abortion was used as a continuation of the Southern strategy to keep the vote of white Christian men in the South. That was literally, that's when abortion became a major platform for the right in politics. This is, in many ways, the abortion outrage is manufactured, and as a result of, you are correct, a bunch of interpretations coming, spanning centuries in the history of the church. And that's something that needs to be considered in how we approach the conversation.
Ryan's not making this up. This is well documented. You can look it up. Schools were going to lose their funding. Not that would totally wipe out this argument either. I love that we're revisiting it. But if our view of what life is and when it begins comes from 30 years of scholarly research as opposed to a couple thousand years, maybe we should consider the traditional stuff too.
Yeah. And honestly, I think we should always be willing to question anything, because truth can withstand scrutiny. So if what we believe is correct, it will still be what we believe when we're done, as we explore and question.
Yeah, that's awesome. I won't get into a ton more of this, but the other major argument that I've come across is that God has a purpose for every person, every unborn person included. So like Ryan's not going to argue this. I'm not going to argue this. Christians are not going to argue this. And we do have some very interesting verses from David the psalmist talking about God knowing us before we were formed in the womb. And I think what, the other side of that is like, God has a purpose and a plan for every one of us, and every one of us has gone outside of that purpose. It's not a great argument, because God's purpose for us isn't cancer. It isn't illness. It's not sickness. Like when he designs who he wants us to be, it's in the image of Christ. And, we're all on that path. We're all on that upward journey, and lives get cut short and derailed in so many different ways. That to say that this one thing is the thing that God was saying, through David in that example, I don't think we're giving justice to the rest of the story there.
Well, and I think you also run into problems when we see this for, I think it's Isaiah or Jeremiah, one of the two. I'm blanking right this second, but
I think it's Jeremiah.
I think it's Jeremiah as well. both the David in the Psalms and Jeremiah there's the use of creative language and figurative language to emphasize a point. We don't read Psalm 23 and say, I'm literally walking through a valley, of the shadow of death. No one knows what that physically looks like. They know what it feels like for sure, but they don't know what it looks like because it's not a literal statement. And there are very, very quick problems with and I know I'm wearing God as a designer as a hat right now, but there are some quick problems that we run into in regards to birth defects and other issues that happen in the womb with babies, with the God as I'm literally knitting you together in the womb. And I think that we can consider the weight of what this imagery is saying without and still be able to avoid a lot of those problematic implications. For sure. But that's in essence, all of this is, I think, open to conversation. And I think the best thing we can do is approach this with the assumption that the other person also wants to reduce abortions, because all of us want to see them go away. All of us would love to be in a world where that doesn't have to happen, because whether you believe it's a life or a potential life, it's still something that could be and now won't be. And I think all of us would fight for a world where that doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah, that's right. I also look at some of the early reasons why people were drawn to Christianity. And part of it is that Roman world, leaving infants out for, the exposure thing. And one of the things that people saw was the goodness of the Christians who would go out to the garbage dumps, hear a feeble baby cry, and they weren't picketing and saying like, this shouldn't happen. I mean, it was in public discourse, but what they were really doing is scooping up these babies and raising them so that in Roman society, if they ever ran into their parents and they had done well and they had become a productive member of their society, they could be reclaimed by their parents. They had a guaranteed heritage with their adopted parents, and they had potential for even more. This is one of the things that was so attractive about Christianity. And that's where I want to segue with you, Ryan, back into what can we do better? Like what needs to change with our conversation and our actions so that the world can take us seriously when we come to the table and say, we would prefer every life be lived. But if not, here's the beauty of what we're doing.
Can I start by modeling it? Because I think I would, and I know we've been modeling it in this conversation, but there's something I should have opened with that I didn't, and I wish I had. And so I hope that the people I'm about to speak to are still watching this. If you are someone who is currently or has already made the decision to abort a fetus, let me say this to you. I am sorry that your decision and that your action or even your situation has been reduced to a talking point by so many people. And I'm sure that you have sat in rooms and sat in conversations where people have completely trashed your situation without even knowing that you were in it. So if I can be one male voice in a very male-dominated religion to say, I am sorry for the way that you've been treated, and I want you to know that you are just as loved and just as valued, regardless of the decision that you come to and regardless of the decision you may have already made. If there's anything I wish we could do in this conversation, it's that we would reinstill value and let people know that they do matter in God's eyes, including the person that we're talking to and we're talking about. We hyper and we zone in on the baby because, yes, I understand the baby can't argue for itself. I fully understand that. And the baby has no advocate but the mother often is an advocate. And even if she isn't in that moment, in your eyes, she is still a human being, just as valuable, just as loved, and just as worthy of Jesus's sacrifice as you and me are. So I really, really hope that whatever we can do, I hope we can do it from a posture of love and of restoration of value.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice if we could hear that and say that with much more regularity? Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. I think I think number one is that. I think number two is I would like to see us be able to take a step back and just have a wider perception about this than honing in on just the abortion and the emotions.
Mhm.
If we can always remember, sin is a great equalizer, the cross is a great equalizer, and the resurrection is a great equalizer. In other words, all three of those things make us all equal. And if you're Seventh-day Adventist, the Sabbath, or Jewish, the Sabbath is another great equalizer, because on it,
Mhm.
neither your servant nor your maidservant, your animals, no one works on Sabbath, right? Nor the stranger that's within your gates. Everyone is equal. No one works on Sabbath. These are all great equalizers in faith. And when we remember that we are coming from a position of equality, not a position of condescension or education to educate someone else, I think we make a lot more. We gain a lot more ground with respect. And that goes for both sides of the conversation. So whether you're a Christian that's pro-choice, which I think we got the bad end of the deal there for pro-choice. I think all of us are pro-life. I think every single one of us is pro-life. I think that, but whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, I hope that you can remember that the person you're talking to and the person you're talking about are both loved and valued by God, regardless of where they currently are in their stage of life or stage of development.
Yeah. We were talking a little bit before also about some practical hands-on things. Like, it's hard to get to the practical stuff until we have our minds right. And you've just kind of laid out here's the philosophy of what we're trying to do. What would you like to see in the churches? What would you like to see hands-on for a little change?
Yeah, I would like to see churches partner with more mental health and emotional well-being professionals. So licensed therapists, licensed counselors, ensuring that what is being told, there needs to be transparency to ensure that what's communicated to any counselors or therapists is not also going to be communicated to the pastor. I know that HIPAA is a thing, don't get me
Mhm.
wrong, but there
Yeah.
are often times where clergy try to get around that, and it gets really hairy. So I would just say, but I would like us to stop speaking outside of our lane. And I say that as a man talking about an issue that I will never personally, have to face, a decision I will never personally have to face. But I wish we would stay a little bit more in our lane as religious folk in that section of the conversation. I wish we would defer and let people know that there are support and resources for them. I do want to see our rhetoric change and us to be slower to anger. And these are all practical things. I think we do need to take a step back and calm down for a second, because we don't know who is listening that is in this position right now. And your witness in that moment could mean the difference between whether or not they go to you, they go to the church, or they go completely somewhere else for the support that they desperately need in that situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's my number one thing is, as this has happened throughout history, different areas with different, slight different nuance on, at what place people think that this fetus becomes a human. Like everybody's got their little laws and religious laws. But what I noticed is that in those religious communities, if they're showing love, then an acceptance first, then people are going through that with their community.
Yeah.
And it seems to be different in the United States because of the shame stuff. I've heard of girls as young as 14, I'm sure even younger, but as soon as they can get pregnant, they're pregnant and they're having to go through it alone. They run away, they go to a clinic, they make a decision without the wisdom and love and support of a community. That makes me so sad to think that there is no trusted adult in someone's circle that they could come to. And church, this is where the people of God could really change this outcome instead of making it, I won't say not making it political. There's always going to be people who want to vote their conscience. That's great. That's all right. But to make it primarily political, where you're not putting where your money, where your mouth is first, is pretty rugged. Yeah, I'd like there to be a designated office, in the church, a designated person who stays educated, who, you know, connects people with those kind of resources, and takes some kind of commitment to non-judgmentalism.
Yeah.
That would be a great step.
Which means we stop with the blanket statements. We stop with the just outright, you know, abortion is this, abortion is that.
Right.
That's not a conversation. That's a declaration. And all that does is cause problems. I don't know where that's actually, oh, you know, now that you say it with just that inflection, you know, you got me. I changed my mind. Like, I've never seen the declaration work. So I'd like to see us change our approach to the conversation. And I think that's one very, very practical way that we could do it. Yeah,
I love it. Yeah, safe communities for discussion, stopping the blanket statements. Anything else come to mind? I like that, because I have never heard of like I've never heard of somebody changing their mind because they got called out on something, especially in public. And my friends who are just so staunchly pro-life, and I like what you said too, because I think we're all pro-life, but people who are politically pro-life, when have I seen them rally around the 14-year-old girl and say, let's make you like a pro-life champion. We're going to take care of everything. All you're going to have to do is focus on getting through school and like getting to the next step. We got your baby care. We got your, you know, your food and clothes and shelter, and just like you focus on, let's get you back to where you can make this on your own. I have not heard any of those stories. I'm sure they're out there, but I've heard several, you know, disowning.
It's very, very few. And I will say this, any changes to our rhetoric now, we will not see the benefits for several years in the future, because the trust that has already been broken with people has to be rebuilt. And that's going to take time. So we can't expect that, oh, we're just going to change our rhetoric and be a little bit more careful with how we approach this conversation and think that now we're suddenly going to get flooded with these people that want help. For years, people have been going away from the church because of the rhetoric and the way that we approach the conversation. That's not going to change just because one time you decided to act differently. They've got to see proof over time that you are loving, that you are caring, and that you value them as much as you value the baby that they could or could not be carrying. Yeah.
Wow. Well said. All right. Wrapping up here, Ryan, is there anything else you wanted to throw down?
I think I've said most of what I want to say, that is relevant to this conversation anyway. I would just encourage those of you to, if you know of someone who is pregnant in your life, that is someone that is, you know, it makes sense for you to reach out to, not like someone you just see on Instagram every once in a while. Just reach out, let them know that you're praying for them. Do not push one way or the other. Just let them know that you're praying for them, that you know it's a big decision that they're in the midst of, and you know, a big life journey, a step in their life journey that they're in the midst of, and support them. And the other thing I would say is, don't forget the fathers. Please don't forget the fathers too. They often need support, and I think one of the biggest ways the church can support is helping to provide meals, is helping to provide support that encourages the father to stay, encourages them to stick it out together. And I think the way that we get rid of abortion is by creating a world, or at least creating an environment where a lot of the typical reasons that we would see for either putting a child up for adoption or putting a child, or going for abortion, creating environments where those are reduced. And a lot can be done correctly when we create those environments. A lot can be done better to support and to show love to the fathers and the mothers as well. So those would be what I would say. But Amy, thank you so much for having me on. This has been fun. And I know that I'm a bit out of my element just based on my gender alone. But I do believe all of us have something important to say. And I acknowledge my place in that. And like I stated earlier, I do believe that the best qualified people to make the decisions regarding a child and carrying it to term are the mother and the doctor.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. If you guys are interested in more from Ryan, will you remind us where we can go to see your content?
Sure. You can find me on YouTube, just searching up Absurdity with Ryan Becker. You can find me on most podcast platforms as well. And you can find me on Twitter or Instagram as Real Ryan Becker. Everyone else is fake. I'm the only real one. But they all got the just Ryan Becker tags. So I took Real Ryan Becker. But yeah, I got it. So yeah, feel free to follow me, reach out. I'm happy to continue the conversation with anyone. And happy to be corrected if there's something that I said wrong as well. I am growing and learning alongside anyone else. And I hope that everyone here is encouraged to continue having meaningful conversations about hard topics.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. And if you guys enjoyed Ryan, just drop him a line, give him some encouragement. He does a lot of good work and trains up other podcasters as well. So you can get a hold of him and see if you can pick up tips or tricks or give him some money to come speak to your group. Thanks again, Ryan.
Thank you.